On the day when luxury was meant to crown a great love, a whisper crossed a wall and changed everything. Amid jasmine, rings, and hundreds of guests, a bride realized that the fairy tale came with fine print. A live microphone, an unexpected file, and a hidden plan turned the altar into a courtroom. And when truth took the floor, someone decided not to be a victim, but the verdict itself. Before witnessing this breathtaking twist, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell, and share it with those who love stories of courage. The Versailles ballroom of the Sovereign Hotel in New York City was resplendent on that June evening. Imported crystals hung from the ceiling like frozen stars, refracting the light into facets that turned every movement into a small spectacle of brilliance. It was the night of the traditional winter ball, an event that brought together Manhattan's business elite to raise funds for charitable institutions, though everyone knew the real purpose was to forge alliances, display jewelry, and close deals between glasses of French champagne. At the center of all attention, as always, was Edward Sterling, 38, heir to the Sterling Properties and Development empire. Dubbed Manhattan's Midas by the business press, Edward had a gift for turning abandoned buildings into luxury properties, multiplying fortunes with the same ease with which he smiled for the cameras. Tall, with an athletic build cultivated in the best gyms, he wore a bespoke Armani tuxedo that accentuated his broad shoulders and distinguished him even among equally well-dressed men. "Edward, how's the Hamptons Marina project coming along?" asked a grey-haired gentleman, approaching with two stunning women hanging on his arms. "Exceeding expectations, Dr. Morrison. Sales have already surpassed 60%, and we haven't even officially launched," Edward replied with that confident smile that had already graced the covers of business magazines. It was a choreography he knew by heart. Smile, shake hands, promise coffee meetings, make subtle jokes about competitors, compliment dresses, and accept invitations he never intended to honor. Everything was calculated, rehearsed, perfect, like his entire life. On the other side of the ballroom, almost invisible to the regular attendees of this type of event, Lucy Fields was discreetly arranging a tray of canapes on one of the side tables. At 24, she worked for the event company organizing the ball, but this was her first time at such a grand affair. Her attentive brown eyes checked every detail, ensuring everything was perfect. The black and white uniform was simple but elegant, and she had tied her curly hair into a low, discreet bun. While rearranging the flower arrangements, Lucy noticed an elderly man drop his cane near the beverage table. In seconds, she was by his side, picking up the object with a gentle smile. "Here you are, sir. Are you all right? I can bring you a chair if you'd prefer to rest a bit," she offered with genuine concern. "Thank you, my dear. Old age plays tricks on us, doesn't it?" the man replied, visibly touched by the simple gesture amidst so many people who hadn't even noticed his small misfortune. "Experience makes up for any tricks time might play," Lucy smiled, helping him settle into a nearby chair. "I'll bring you a glass of water, sir, just a moment." Edward watched the scene from a distance, momentarily interrupting his conversation with the president of an investment bank. There was something in the naturalness of that gesture that intrigued him. In an environment where every action was calculated to impress or gain an advantage, the sincerity of that act was as discordant as a note out of tune. Later, when the elderly man was revealed to be Arthur Monroe, one of the country's greatest art collectors and a notoriously hard-to-please figure, Edward realized that the young woman had no idea who she had helped. She had simply been kind to someone in need. "Who is that young woman?" he asked Peter, the event organizer, as he passed by with a tablet. "Who? Oh, Lucy. She's been with us for a few months. Efficient, polite. Why? Is there a problem?" Peter replied, concerned. "No, quite the opposite," Edward answered vaguely, not taking his eyes off the young woman who was now helping an elderly lady find the restroom. The evening followed its prescribed course. Speeches were made, symbolic checks were handed over for the cameras, and deals were subtly sealed between smiles. Edward played his role as the perfect host, but his eyes kept searching for the discreet figure who seemed to exist in a parallel universe within the same ballroom. It was near the end of the party, as guests were beginning to leave, that he saw her again. Lucy was in the hotel's winter garden, carefully picking up shards of a broken glass so no one would get hurt. "Leave that for the cleaning crew," Edward said, approaching her. Lucy looked up, surprised to see the man everyone had been fawning over, all night speaking directly to her. "I'd rather not leave broken glass where someone could get hurt," she replied simply, continuing her task. Edward knelt beside her, taking a linen napkin to help gather the shards. The gesture made Lucy look at him with curiosity. Their eyes met for a moment that seemed to stretch on. "Edward Sterling," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "I know who you are, sir," she smiled faintly. "Lucy Fields. And be careful with those shards. That suit probably cost more than my rent for a year." The sincerity of her response caught him off guard, making him laugh genuinely. Not the rehearsed laugh of business meetings, but something spontaneous that he had almost forgotten the sound of. "Is your shift over?" he asked, checking his watch. It was almost 1 in the morning. "As soon as we pack everything up and do the final count," Lucy replied, standing up with the shards carefully wrapped in the napkin. "Can I give you a ride? I can wait." Lucy watched him for a moment, as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Sterling, but I live on the other side of the city, and I'm sure you don't usually frequent Queens." "Edward," he corrected, "and you'd be surprised by the places I go." "I'm sure I would," she replied with a polite but firm smile. "Still, I appreciate it and decline. Good night, Edward." As he watched her walk away, Edward felt something unusual. It wasn't just that he had been gently rejected, something that rarely happened in his life, but the feeling of having glimpsed something authentic in a world full of artifice. That same night, in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Edward found himself thinking about the catering staffer, her smile without ulterior motives, and the gentleness with which she treated those around her. Somehow, amidst crystals, champagne, and fortunes, he had found something truly valuable that couldn't be calculated in figures. The headquarters of Sterling Enterprises occupied the top 5 floors of a mirrored skyscraper on Park Avenue. From the 45th floor, where Edward's office was located, New York City looked like a scale model, organized, controllable, distant. On that Monday morning, however, not even the panoramic view could calm his unusual restlessness. "Is there a problem with the quarterly report?" asked Deborah, his executive assistant for over 10 years, placing another cup of coffee on his desk. "No, everything's in order," Edward replied, without looking away from his computer screen. "Deborah, do you know an event company called Sonata, or something similar?" His assistant adjusted her glasses, thoughtful. "I believe it's Symphony Events. They organized the Winter Ball on Friday. Why?" Edward nodded vaguely. "Just curious. The event was impeccable. I was thinking of recommending them for the launch of the Aurora Tower." It was a lie, of course. Edward just wanted a pretext to see Lucy again. Since the night of the ball, her image had appeared in his mind at the most unlikely moments. During important meetings, while signing multi-million-dollar contracts, even during his morning swim practice. After a lunch with foreign investors, Edward did something completely out of character. He dismissed his driver and personally drove his Porsche to the Symphony Events headquarters, located in a modest commercial building in Midtown. The receptionist's eyes widened when she recognized him. "Mr. Sterling, how can we help you?" "I'd like to speak with the person responsible for organizing the Winter Ball," he replied with his best corporate smile. Minutes later, he was meeting with Clarice, the director of events, who couldn't hide her excitement at having Edward Sterling in person in her small office, which was filled with folders and fabric samples. "We are truly honored by your visit, Mr. Sterling. The feedback on the ball was extraordinary. How can we be of service?" Edward explained his supposed intention to hire the company for the launch of the Aurora Tower, asking technical questions and showing professional interest. Then, as if it were an afterthought, he commented, "I'd like to keep some of the staff from the ball's team. There was a young woman, very efficient, Lucy, if I'm not mistaken." Clarice smiled. "Lucy Fields, one of our best employees, despite having been with us for only a short time. She has an incredible ability to anticipate and solve problems. I'll make sure she's on the team for your event." Edward left the meeting with a date and time noted for the launch event, and with an even more valuable piece of information. Lucy worked on Tuesdays and Thursdays at the Belvedere Café, just a few blocks away, to supplement her income. The Belvedere Café was the opposite of the world Edward was accustomed to. Small, cozy, unpretentious, with books stacked on rustic shelves and plants hanging from the ceiling. The aroma of freshly ground coffee and homemade bread created an atmosphere that invited you to stay. Edward entered cautiously, feeling out of place despite his impeccable Italian suit, or perhaps precisely because of it. He spotted Lucy behind the counter, taking an order. She wore a simple white shirt, a dark green apron, and her curly hair was tied back in a casual ponytail. There was a naturalness about her that fascinated him. As he approached the counter, he saw the exact moment she recognized him. Surprise washed over her face like a wave. "Mr. Sterling," she said, recovering quickly. "Welcome to the Belvedere. Can I help you?" "Edward," he corrected again. "And yes, a coffee would be great. What do you recommend?" "That depends. Did you come here to appreciate real coffee or just to find me?" she asked directly, with a raised eyebrow and a half smile. Edward felt his face grow slightly warm. He wasn't used to being read so easily. "Both," he admitted, with an honesty that surprised them both. Lucy nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. "In that case, try our coffee from the Colombian Highlands, ground to order, prepared with a cloth filter. It's simple, but it reveals all the secrets of the bean, and to go with it, some warm cheese bread, fresh from the oven." As she prepared the coffee with precise movements, Lucy gave him a curious look. "How did you find out I work here?" "I spoke with your boss about hiring Symphony for an event," he replied, watching her work. "And she just happened to mention my second job?" Lucy questioned, incredulous. "Not exactly. I asked about you." His honesty surprised him again. With anyone else, he would have crafted a convincing story, but with Lucy, the layers of artifice seemed unnecessary. She placed the steaming cup in front of him, along with a small plate of golden cheese bread. "And why would you do that? It's not like we have anything in common," she commented, leaning against the counter. Edward tasted the coffee. It was truly extraordinary, strong, complex, with notes of caramel and red berries that no imported espresso machine could replicate. "Maybe that's exactly why," he finally replied, "because we have nothing in common." At that moment, an elderly lady called Lucy over to her table, and she walked away with an enigmatic smile. Edward stayed at the cafe for over 2 hours, answering emails on his tablet while watching Lucy work. There was an unpretentious grace in her movements, a genuineness in the conversations she had with the regular customers. When the cafe started to empty in the late afternoon, Lucy approached him again. "Anything else, Mr. Sterling? Or should I say, Edward? You're quitting time. I'd like to take you to dinner," he said directly. Lucy tilted her head, appraising him with the same searching gaze from the night of the ball. "Why?" The question caught him off guard. Women didn't usually question his intentions when he asked them to dinner. "Because I'd like to get to know you better. There are dozens of stunning women in your social circle who would give anything for a dinner with Manhattan's most eligible bachelor," she observed, not with hostility, but simply stating a fact. "What do you want with a girl who works 2 jobs to pay the bills and take care of her sick mother?" The mention of her sick mother was new. Edward felt a pang in his chest, imagining the weight that this young woman carried. "I don't want anything other than what I said. To get to know you better," he replied, and then added with a sincerity he rarely allowed himself. "You intrigue me, Lucy." She studied him for a long moment before answering. "I get off at 7, but I'm not dressed for Michelin-starred restaurants." "I know a place where that doesn't matter," he assured her, feeling a joy disproportionate to the simplicity of this small victory. At 7 o'clock sharp, Edward was waiting on the sidewalk as Lucy locked up the cafe. The sun was beginning to set, painting the New York sky with orange hues rarely noticed by the hurried passers-by. "Where are we going?" she asked, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "Do you trust me?" Edward returned the question, holding out his hand. Lucy hesitated for a moment, then smiled and accepted the gesture for now. What neither of them knew was that this simple coffee had marked the beginning of something that would challenge all the conventions of the worlds they belonged to, or didn't belong to, and would forever change the course of their lives. In the weeks that followed, Edward and Lucy built an unlikely routine. They met in discreet places where he wouldn't be recognized. Small bookstores in Chinatown, a hidden antique shop in Greenwich Village, a little frequented botanical garden in the Bronx. With each meeting, the layers that separated them, of class, experience, social expectations, seemed to dissolve a little more. One Sunday afternoon, as they were walking through a public park, Edward surprised Lucy with a direct question. "Why have you never invited me to your home?" Lucy slowed her pace, looking at the ducks swimming peacefully in the small lake. "I live with my mother in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens. It's not exactly the kind of place you'd be comfortable in. "I didn't ask for comfort, I asked to see your world," he replied, stopping to face her. "You know my office, you've seen my car, you know where I live, but I still know almost nothing about your life." It was true. Lucy maintained a subtle barrier, talking more about books, movies, and ideas than about her daily reality. "I have my reasons," she replied, resuming her walk. "The main one is my mother. She has multiple sclerosis. On good days, she can get around with the help of a cane. On bad days, she needs a wheelchair." Lucy paused, looking at the horizon. "She used to be a university professor, you know, a PhD in American literature. Now she depends on me for almost everything." Edward felt the weight of that revelation. While he had grown up with privilege, with access to the best schools and opportunities, Lucy had taken on adult responsibilities when she was practically a teenager. "I want to meet her," he finally said. "Your mother, I mean. And your home." Lucy stared at him in surprise. "Why?" "Because she's important to you," he answered simply. The following Sunday, Edward's Porsche looked utterly out of place on the narrow streets of Queens. He had insisted on driving himself, refusing to call a driver as he normally would. He parked in front of a small four-story building with peeling paint and a single entrance with no doorman. The apartment was exactly as Lucy had described, small but impeccably clean and organized. What it lacked in space, it made up for in personality. Walls covered with makeshift shelves full of books, small potted plants on the windowsills, and photographs in simple frames. Helen Fields was sitting in an adapted armchair near the window. Despite the illness gradually consuming her mobility, she maintained a dignified posture and alert eyes that examined Edward with interest when Lucy introduced them. "So, you're the famous businessman who's been occupying my daughter's thoughts," she said, with a sharp smile that greatly resembled Lucy's. "Mom!" Lucy protested, blushing. Edward smiled, immediately charmed by the older woman's frankness. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Helen. Lucy talks a lot about you." "And about you, too, though she tries to hide it," Helen replied, gesturing to the nearby chair. "Sit down, Edward, and tell me what a man like you is doing with a simple girl like my daughter." "Mom, please," Lucy intervened, mortified. "It's all right," Edward assured her, sitting down. "It's a fair question." The lunch that followed was surprisingly pleasant. Helen, despite her condition, had a sharp mind and a refined sense of humor. It was clear where Lucy's intelligence and perceptiveness came from. They talked about literature. Helen had been a specialist in Henry James, politics and the transformations of New York City over the decades. While Lucy was making coffee in the small kitchen, Helen gave Edward a piercing look. "My daughter is not an exotic pastime, Mr. Sterling, nor is she a charity project. I've never thought of her that way," he replied, holding her gaze. "Good, because Lucy may not have your money, but she has something far more valuable: integrity. And if you hurt her, you should know that even in this chair, I will find creative ways to make you regret it." Edward couldn't help but smile. I'd expect nothing less from Lucy's mother. When they left the apartment hours later, Edward felt strangely light. The simplicity of that home, the evident affection between mother and daughter, the conversations without artifice, it all contrasted dramatically with the polished coldness of his own childhood home, where displays of affection were considered vulgarities to be avoided. "Your mother is incredible," he commented as he drove back toward Manhattan. "She liked you," Lucy replied, looking out the car window. "Believe me, that doesn't happen often." "I'm lucky then." That night, Edward took Lucy to see his penthouse apartment in the Millennium Tower. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Over 5,000 square feet, decorated by a renowned interior designer with signed works of art, exclusive designer furniture, and a panoramic view of an illuminated New York City. Lucy walked silently through the space, observing every detail without showing any awe. "It's beautiful," she commented finally, "but it looks more like a magazine page than a home." The observation, far from offending him, struck Edward as a truth he had never noticed before. Indeed, despite all the luxury, the space lacked a soul. "I never thought of that," he admitted, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "But you're right." They sat on the balcony, watching the city lights like small terrestrial stars. The night was pleasant, with a gentle breeze tempering the typical heat of a New York spring. "Why me?" Lucy asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Of all the women who could be here with you, why did you choose the waitress from the cafe?" Edward considered the question for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. Because with you I don't have to be Edward Sterling, the businessman. I can just be Edward, the man. He paused. With you, I don't feel like I need to impress or calculate every word. It's liberating. Lucy smiled, a small but genuine smile that lit up her eyes. You know what's funny? You have everything that so many people dream of, and yet you seem so— She hesitated, searching for the right word. Empty, he suggested. I was going to say incomplete. Edward put his glass down on the table and moved closer to Lucy, looking directly into her eyes. And you make me feel less incomplete. The kiss that followed was gentle, hesitant, as if they were both treading on unfamiliar ground, which, in a way, they were. When they separated, Lucy had a serious expression. I don't want to be just a passing adventure, Edward. I'm not the kind of woman who accepts scraps of attention. I've never thought of you that way, he assured her, caressing her face. What I feel for you is different from anything I've ever experienced before. Their meetings became more frequent in the following weeks. Edward adapted his overloaded schedule to create spaces where he could see Lucy. Slowly, she also lowered her guards, allowing herself to believe that maybe against all odds, this relationship could actually work. One Saturday night, after a simple dinner prepared by Edward in his apartment, he had insisted on cooking, revealing surprising culinary talents. They lay embraced on the sofa, talking about everything and nothing. The intimacy between them grew naturally, without rush. As the kisses became more intense, Edward felt Lucy tense under his touch. We can stop if you want, he murmured against her lips. Lucy took a deep breath, her eyes closed. I don't want to stop. I'm just nervous. Nervous about what? He asked, pulling back slightly to look at her. Because I've never— Lucy blushed intensely, looking away. Edward understood immediately. You've never been with anyone before, she confirmed with a small nod, still not looking at him. Lucy, look at me, he asked gently, touching her chin. There's no rush. We can wait as long as you need. She finally met his eyes, vulnerable as she had never allowed herself to be. It's just— Will it hurt? The question, asked almost in a whisper, struck Edward like a bolt of lightning. All the tenderness he didn't even know he possessed surfaced in that moment. It wasn't just about desire. It was about trust, about her choosing to give him something so precious. I promise to be gentle, he answered with a seriousness that surprised them both. And we can stop at any moment you want. That night, under the soft light of the city pulsating outside, Edward discovered a form of intimacy that transcended the physical. Every touch, every kiss, was guided by a care he had never devoted to anyone. For Lucy, there was no pain, there was discovery, trust, surrender. And when they finally became one, they both understood that something fundamental had changed between them. The Upper East Side was waking up early on that Sunday morning. Imposing mansions hid behind high walls and impeccable gardens, protecting the privacy of Manhattan's elite. One of these mansions, particularly majestic, with architecture inspired by Tuscan palazzos, had belonged to the Sterling family for 3 generations. Amelia Sterling walked through the winter garden, watching her gardener carefully trim the bushes of her award-winning rose garden. At 65, she maintained the elegant posture and sharp gaze that had made her one of the most feared and respected figures in high society. A widow for 15 years, she had taken the reins of the family fortune with an iron fist, determined to preserve and expand the empire her late husband had built. Ma'am, Eliza Montgomery has just arrived, the housekeeper announced, interrupting her thoughts. Take her to the gazebo, Regina, and serve that English tea she enjoys, Amelia ordered, removing the gardening gloves she wore more for aesthetics than for practicality. Eliza Montgomery, the editor-in-chief of Manhattan Society magazine, was one of the few people Amelia considered worthy of her trust, within the limits her calculating nature allowed, of course. Eliza knew all the secrets, scandals, and movements of Manhattan's elite, which made her a valuable source of information. Amelia, darling, you look radiant as always, Eliza greeted, rising for the traditional air kiss near the cheeks. That new treatment is working wonders. Thank you, Eliza. And to what do I owe the pleasure? You rarely request meetings with such urgency. The journalist took a sip of tea before answering, savoring the moment. It's about Edward. I've noticed an interesting pattern in recent weeks, she began, studying Amelia's reaction. He's been seen in— Unusual places. What kind of places? Amelia questioned, maintaining her impeccable composure. A cafe in the village, small bookstores, public parks. Eliza paused dramatically, always accompanied by the same young woman. A simple girl, from what I've heard. Works as a waitress or something of the sort. The only visible sign of Amelia's disturbance was a slight tightening of her lips. Edward has always had his pastimes, she commented, with studied disdain. It's probably just a temporary distraction. You're right, probably, Eliza agreed, though her tone suggested otherwise. But I found it curious that he cancelled important commitments to meet her, and there are rumors he's taken her to his apartment. Several times. That was indeed unusual. Edward had always kept his dalliances discreet and compartmentalized, never allowing them to interfere with his business or invade his personal space. Does she have a name, this waitress? Amelia asked, trying to sound disinterested. Lucy Fields, 20-something, lives in Queens with her sick mother, works 2 jobs, no criminal record, no scandals, practically invisible on social media. An ordinary girl from what I could gather. Eliza smiled, except for the fact that she's captured the attention of Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. Amelia nodded slowly, processing the information. Thank you for alerting me, Eliza. As always, your loyalty is valuable. I just thought you should know, especially considering the plans for Edward and Beatrice. Beatrice Alastair Price, only daughter of Richard Alastair Price, owner of the second-largest private bank in the country, and a strategic ally of the Sterlings in numerous ventures. The arrangement had not been formalized, but it was implied in the conversations, dinners, and social events carefully orchestrated over the past few years. The plans remain unchanged, Amelia assured her, with the certainty of someone who did not tolerate opposition. Minor distractions do not alter the main course. When Eliza left, Amelia remained in the gazebo for a long time, observing the meticulously planned garden. Everything in her life had been carefully cultivated. Social relationships, business alliances, the immaculate public image of the Sterling family. She would not allow some waitress to destabilize decades of strategic planning. Hours later, in Edward's penthouse, the atmosphere could not have been more different from the tension that had settled in the Sterling mansion. He and Lucy had spent the morning in bed, between conversations, laughter, and moments of intimacy that were becoming increasingly natural between them. I have to go, Lucy murmured reluctantly, looking at the clock. I promised my mum I'd take her to the park this afternoon. I can join you, Edward offered, tracing lazy circles on Lucy's bare back. She smiled, kissing him softly. I'd love that, but my mum needs her space sometimes. She hates it when people treat her like an invalid. I understand. Dinner later? I can't. I have a symphony event tonight. Some executive's wedding, she replied, getting up and starting to dress. Edward watched her, marveling at the naturalness of her movements, at the complete absence of the affectation that characterized all the women he had known before. I'm in love with you, he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Lucy froze, her blouse half-buttoned. Slowly she turned to face him, her eyes wide with surprise. What? I'm in love with you, he repeated, sitting up in bed. I know it might seem sudden, but I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you. Lucy sat down beside him, her face a mixture of conflicting emotions. Edward, we're from completely different worlds. You're Edward Sterling, I'm just Lucy, he completed, holding her hands. And that's more than enough. In fact, it's all I want. She stared at him for a long time, as if searching for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she let out a shaky sigh. I'm in love with you too, she finally admitted. And it scares me. Why? Because people like me don't end up with people like you, Edward. Not in real life. At best, we're interesting chapters before the expected ending. He held her face in his hands. You're not a chapter. You're the whole book. That night, as Lucy served canapés at the lavish wedding of a financial market executive, she couldn't stop thinking about Edward's words. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream of a future with him. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Lucy, isn't it? A female voice interrupted her thoughts. Turning, Lucy found herself facing an elegant woman, probably in her 30s, wearing a dress that would cost several months of her salary. Yes, ma'am, can I help you? The woman smiled, a smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "Actually, I think I can help you." She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Beatrice Alistair Price, Edward Sterling's fiancée." Lucy's world seemed to slow down, the words echoing as if in an empty chamber. Fiancé. Edward. Impossible. "There must be some mistake," she managed to say, her voice firmer than she expected. Beatrice laughed, a crystalline, cruel sound. "The mistake is yours, dear. Edward and I have been practically engaged since birth. Our families have an arrangement. Business, you understand." She leaned in slightly, as if sharing a secret. "He has these occasional diversions, usually with exotic or unusual girls. A Ukrainian model, a Japanese pianist, now you, the waitress with the pure soul." Her gaze swept over Lucy from head to toe. "But he always comes back to what really matters. Family, status, duty." Lucy felt her stomach sink, but she maintained her composure. "If you'll excuse me, I need to get back to work." "Of course, dear. I just thought you deserved to know. He always comes back, you know, and the sooner you understand that, the less you'll suffer." As Beatrice walked away, Lucy stood motionless, the tray of canapés forgotten in her hands. Edward's words of love, which had seemed so sincere just hours before, now sounded hollow. How could she have been so naive? The next day, Edward was met with a tense atmosphere when he arrived for Sunday lunch at the family mansion. Seated at the head of the long dining table, he faced the piercing gaze of his mother, who had barely touched the exquisitely served food. "Eliza Montgomery visited me yesterday," Amelia announced, breaking the silence. "She brought some interesting information about your new pastime." Edward carefully put down his fork. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mother." "Lucy Fields," Amelia replied, the name pronounced as if it was something unpleasant. "The waitress from Queens." A wave of anger washed over Edward. "Don't talk about her like that." "So it's true." Amelia leaned forward slightly. "Edward, you have responsibilities. To the family, to the company, to our legacy. My personal life doesn't interfere with any of that." "Your personal life is all of that," Amelia retorted, her voice controlled but sharp. "The Alistair Prices are expecting an official announcement soon. Richard mentioned it 3 times at the last board meeting." Edward felt his blood boil. "There will be no announcement. I never agreed to this absurd arrangement." "It's not a matter of agreeing, it's your duty." Amelia softened her tone, adopting the strategy that had always worked with her son. "Darling, have your fun with this girl if you must. But don't confuse an adventure with something serious. People like us have greater responsibilities." "People like us?" Edward repeated, incredulous. "What are we exactly, Mother? A different species. We are guardians of a legacy, of a name, of a tradition." Edward stood up abruptly. "And what if I don't want this burden anymore?" Amelia's gaze hardened. "Don't be dramatic. You've always known what your role was. Maybe it's time to rewrite that role." When Edward left the mansion, he immediately called Lucy. He needed to see her, to tell her about the conversation with his mother, to assure her that nothing and no one would interfere with what they felt for each other. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. He sent messages that went unanswered. An uncomfortable feeling began to form in his chest. When he finally decided to go to the small apartment in Queens, he was met by Helen, whose normally welcoming expression had been replaced by a cold stare. "She doesn't want to see you," she informed him curtly. "Please, I need to talk to her. There's been a misunderstanding." Helen crossed her arms, blocking the entrance. "A misunderstanding? Is that what you call being engaged to another woman while seducing my daughter?" Edward felt as if he had been punched. "I'm not engaged to anyone. Who told her that?" "Your fiancée made a point of introducing herself, and of explaining how you have a pattern of exotic diversions before returning to what really matters." "Beatrice, of course." Anger mixed with desperation. "That's a lie. Please let me explain to Lucy." Helen's expression softened slightly, seeing the genuine anguish on the young man's face. "She's hurt, Edward, and confused. Give her time. Tell her I love her, that she's the only one who matters to me. Please?" As he walked away from the small building, Edward felt that everything he had built with Lucy, the trust, the intimacy, the love, was crumbling because of conspiracies and rumors. And for the first time in his privileged life, he discovered that all his money and power couldn't buy the one thing he truly desired, Lucy's heart back. A week passed without Lucy answering Edward's messages or calls. He had tried everything. Flowers delivered to the cafe and the apartment, explanatory messages, even a handwritten letter, something he had never done for anyone. The persistent silence was torture for someone accustomed to getting everything he wanted with a simple snap of his fingers. At the Sterling Enterprises headquarters, Edward looked like a ghost of his former self. Dark circles marked his face, an unshaven jawline contrasted with his usual impeccable appearance, and his concentration wavered, even in the most important meetings. "Are you all right, sir?" Deborah ventured, placing another cup of coffee on his desk. "You seem tired." "I'm fine," he replied curtly, without looking up from the documents he had been pretending to read for over an hour. Deborah, who knew him better than any other employee, hesitated at the door. "If I may be so bold, sir, when my ex-husband and I separated, I thought my world had ended, but I learned that some things have to be said in person, no matter how much the other person resists." Edward finally looked up, surprised by the unusual intervention from his always discreet assistant. "Thank you, Deborah," he said simply, but something in her suggestion lit a spark of determination. That same afternoon, he positioned himself strategically in front of the Belvedere Cafe, knowing Lucy would be leaving at the end of her shift. When she finally appeared at the back door, she looked as worn out as he did. Dull eyes, heavy movements. "Lucy," he called, approaching cautiously. She froze upon seeing him, a mix of emotions crossing her tired face before it hardened into a mask of indifference. "What do you want, Edward? Haven't you caused enough damage?" "5 minutes. That's all I ask. After that, if you still want me to disappear from your life, I promise I'll respect your decision." Lucy hesitated, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. 3 minutes. In the park across the street. The small park, a sliver of green between buildings, was nearly deserted at that hour. They sat on a worn-out bench, keeping a safe distance between them. "I'm not engaged to Beatrice," Edward began, straight to the point. "I never have been." She seemed quite convinced otherwise. "Because it's what my mother and her family planned, not what I chose," he explained, turning to face her. "Yes, there's an expectation that I'll marry her, an implicit agreement between families, as if we were still in the 19th century. But I never agreed to it, never made any promises." Lucy studied his face, searching for signs of a lie. "Why would she come to me then?" "Because she realized I'm in love with you, because she saw that for the first time I found someone who truly matters to me." Edward hesitated. "My mother knows too. Mother, Eliza Montgomery, the gossip columnist, saw us together and told her." A humorless laugh escaped Lucy's lips. "Is the entire high society conspiring against us? That sounds ridiculous." "It is ridiculous," Edward agreed. "But it's real. For people like my mother, marriage alliances are still business tools. And Beatrice, she was raised to be the perfect wife for someone like me. The final trophy in a life of planned achievements." Lucy absorbed the information in silence. Finally, she asked, "And what about that story of exotic diversions before you go back to what matters?" Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of shame. "I've had relationships before, some with women who weren't part of the expected social circle. But it was never like she described, and it was never ever like what I have with you." "How can I believe that?" "Because I never took anyone to my home before you. I never introduced anyone to my mother. Not even Beatrice has been to a family lunch as an official guest. I never let anyone get to know the real Edward." Their 3 minutes were up, but Lucy made no move to get up. "Even if all of that is true," she said finally, "it doesn't change the fact that our worlds are incompatible. You've seen my reality. A sick mother, a tiny apartment, 2 jobs to pay the bills. How does that fit into your life of charity galas and board meetings?" "I don't know," Edward admitted with sincerity. "I just know I want to find out. With you." Lucy shook her head, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "I need time, Edward, to think, to process all of this." "As much time as you need," he promised, resisting the urge to touch her. "I'll be waiting." As Lucy walked away, a confused mix of contradictory emotions churned in her chest. She wanted to believe Edward, but the fear of being just a temporary chapter in his privileged life was paralyzing. The next morning, Edward faced one of the most challenging meetings of his career, the annual shareholders' meeting for Sterling Enterprises. As CEO, he had to present results, future strategies, and answer often hostile questions from investors eager for higher dividends. Amelia occupied the central seat at the table, as chairwoman of the board. Beside her, Richard Alistair Price represented the second largest block of shares after the Sterling family itself. The presence of Beatrice, sitting next to her father as an observer, was a clear message to Edward. "Before we begin the official agenda," Amelia announced after the initial formalities, "I would like to share some personal news that will surely delight everyone." Her gaze fixed on Edward. "Soon, our family and the Alistair Price family will further strengthen their historic ties. Edward and Beatrice will finally formalize their commitment next month." A murmur of approval went through the room as Edward felt the blood drain from his face. His mother had just announced a non-existent engagement without even consulting him, in front of the entire board. "Mother," he intervened, his voice dangerously controlled, "I think there's been some misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Amelia replied with an icy smile. "It's time to assume your responsibilities, son. The official announcement will be during the Foundation's anniversary ball, as planned for years." Edward looked at the faces around the table, some smiling, others curious, all awaiting his reaction. Beatrice stared at him with a mixture of triumph and possessiveness, as if he were a newly won prize. In that moment, something inside him broke. Years of obedience, of following the prescribed path, of putting his family's expectations above his own. In a flash of clarity, Edward understood that he was about to repeat his father's pattern: a loveless marriage, a life of appearances, the perpetuation of a cycle of unhappiness disguised as success. "There will be no announcement," he declared, standing up. "There will be no engagement. There will be no wedding." The ensuing silence was deafening. Amelia stared at him as if she had been slapped. "Edward, don't be ridiculous. This is not the time for adolescent drama. On the contrary, Mother, it's the perfect time to set things straight." He turned to Richard. "Mr. Alistair Price, I have the utmost respect for you as a business partner, but I will not marry your daughter. There has never been any commitment on my part." Richard adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "Amelia, perhaps we should discuss this in private." "There's nothing to discuss," Beatrice intervened, her face contorted in barely contained fury. "Edward is just confused because of that waitress." Murmurs rippled through the room. Edward felt a surge of anger at hearing Lucy mentioned in that disdainful tone. "Her name is Lucy," he declared firmly, "and yes, I am in love with her. But my decision not to marry you, Beatrice, was made long before I met her. I just didn't have the courage to say it clearly until now." Amelia rose, her face pale with fury. "Son, think carefully about what you're doing. The consequences of living a life I didn't choose would be far worse," Edward interrupted. Then, addressing the board, "I apologize for the deviation from the agenda. Now, if you'll permit me, let's resume the meeting with matters that are actually relevant to our company." For the next 2 hours, Edward conducted the presentation with a clarity and confidence that surprised everyone, including himself. For the first time, he felt truly in control, not just of the company but of his own life. When the meeting ended, Richard Alistair Price sought him out in the hallway. "That was a risky move, Edward," the banker commented, with no apparent hostility. "It wasn't a move, Mr. Alistair Price. It was a personal decision I should have made a long time ago." The older man nodded slowly. "You know, I've always admired your strategic vision in business. Today I saw something even more valuable. Integrity." He paused. "Our business partnership remains unchanged. Business is business, family is family." Edward felt a huge weight lift from his shoulders. "I appreciate your understanding. As for my daughter," Richard sighed, "Beatrice was raised to believe she deserved the best of everything. It will take time for her to process this." He extended his hand. "Good luck, Edward, with business and with your Lucy." Amelia, on the other hand, showed no such understanding. When Edward returned to his office, she was waiting for him, her rigid posture betraying her contained fury. "You humiliated our family today," she declared without preamble. "How you humiliated me personally. That was not my intention, Mother, but you forced my hand by announcing something I never agreed to." "For a passing fling? A girl from Queens who's probably only after your money?" Edward laughed humorlessly. "If you knew Lucy, you'd know how absurd that accusation is. You're blind, son." Amelia stepped closer, softening her tone. This girl, she may be charming, different, a breath of fresh air, but think about the future. In 5-10 years, when the novelty wears off and you're stuck with someone who doesn't belong in our world. That's the problem, Mother. This, our world you value so much. It's empty. Edward sighed deeply. Was Father happy? Truly happy? Or was he just playing the part expected of him, like I've been doing my whole life? The mention of her late husband hit Amelia like a physical blow. For a brief moment, her mask of perfection faltered. Your father understood the meaning of duty, of legacy. And he died at 52, Mother, a bitter man who never lived his own life. Edward stepped closer, taking his mother's hands in his. I don't want that fate for myself. Amelia pulled her hands away sharply. You are the CEO of this company, the heir to the Sterling Empire. You have responsibilities greater than your romantic whims. I can be all of that and still choose who I share my life with, Edward replied firmly. And I choose Lucy, if she'll still have me. Amelia's eyes glittered with determination. We'll see how long this youthful idealism lasts when you face the real consequences of your choices. As his mother left the office, Edward felt strangely light, despite the veiled threat. He had crossed a point of no return, and he didn't regret it. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Lucy. I just defied my entire family, the company board, and probably half of Manhattan's elite, all for you. Not because I expect it to impress or convince you, but because I finally understand what really matters. You taught me that. On the other side of the city, in the small apartment in Queens, Lucy read and reread the message, her heart pounding. Helen watched her daughter with a mixture of concern and curiosity. What did he say this time? She finally asked. Lucy handed her mother the phone, who read the message in silence. When she finished, there was a different light in her eyes. And what are you going to do now? Helen questioned, handing back the phone. I don't know, Lucy confessed, her voice trembling. It's too scary to believe that someone like him would really choose someone like me. Helen took her daughter's hands in hers. My dear, you have always seen yourself as smaller than you really are. Maybe it's time you saw your own worth, the same worth this young man seems to have recognized. That night, as the city prepared to sleep, two souls remained awake, contemplating the abyss between their worlds, and questioning whether love would truly be able to build a bridge across it. The Queensbridge Community Centre, located in the heart of Queens, was buzzing with activity on that Saturday morning. The annual fundraising event for the art education program attracted residents from all over the borough, with food stalls, cultural performances, and workshops for children. Lucy was coordinating volunteers, making sure the donation tables were organized and everyone knew their roles. Dressed simply in jeans, a white t-shirt, and sneakers, she wore her hair in a casual ponytail. Even so, she radiated a magnetic energy that drew smiles and warm greetings from the locals who had known her since childhood. Lucy, the audiovisual team hasn't arrived yet, warned Michael, one of the organizers, rushing over, and we need to test the sound system before the first performance. I'll call them again, she replied, checking her watch with concern. She was about to grab her phone when she spotted an unexpected figure walking through the main gate of the community center. Edward Sterling, dressed surprisingly casually in jeans, a blue shirt with rolled-up sleeves and sneakers, a look that would never appear in business magazines, was carrying a large box of sound equipment. Behind him, three men brought more equipment, directed by Peter, the coordinator from Symphony Events. I heard you needed some help with the sound, Edward said, approaching with a hesitant smile. I brought reinforcements. Lucy stared at him, stunned. How did you... I called your mother. She told me about the event. He put the box down. I hope you don't mind. Before Lucy could respond, Michael intervened, obviously not recognizing Edward. Man, you're a lifesaver. Can you help set this up? I have zero technical skills. Edward nodded readily. Of course, just show me where. For the next few hours, Lucy watched in disbelief as Edward worked tirelessly, setting up equipment, carrying tables, helping to decorate stalls. He sweated like any other volunteer, with no airs or complaints. No one there except her had any idea they were getting help from the CEO of one of the largest development companies in the country. In the middle of the afternoon, when she finally got a moment's rest, Lucy approached him, offering a bottle of water. Thanks, Edward said, drinking eagerly. Your neighborhood is amazing. I've never seen such a close-knit community. People here support each other, Lucy explained, sitting next to him on a bench under a leafy tree. When you don't have much, you learn to share the little you have. Edward nodded thoughtfully. I got your message. 3 days had passed since he sent his text about defying his family. Lucy's reply had been brief. I need to see you in person. Saturday at the community event. If you really want to prove something to me, come work as a volunteer. No driver, no assistants. Just you. I didn't expect you to actually come, Lucy admitted, much less to carry boxes and set up equipment. Why not? Did you think I was incapable of manual labor? I thought you weren't willing to get your hands dirty. She paused. Or to be seen at a community event in Queens. Edward held her gaze. You still don't get it, do you? I'd do anything for you, Lucy. Anything. Something in the intensity of his words completely disarmed her. The wall of mistrust she had built began to show cracks. What happened after that meeting, she finally asked. Edward recounted the events of the past few days, the definitive break with Beatrice, his mother's contained fury, Richard Alastair Price's surprising understanding. He told her about the subtle retaliations he was already beginning to face, declined invitations, unreturned calls, whispers in the company hallways. My mother is using all her influence to socially isolate me, he concluded without self-pity. It's like being in social quarantine, and you don't regret it. Not for a second, he answered without hesitation. In fact, it's liberating, like I can finally breathe after years of suffocating under other people's expectations. Lucy studied his face, searching for any sign of falsehood. She found none. I still don't know if I can believe in this, she confessed. In us. It's like we're living in a fantasy that sooner or later is going to crash into reality. What reality, Lucy? The one that says people from different worlds can't be together. Who decides that? Before they could continue their conversation, they were interrupted by a group of children who pulled Edward over to help with the kite-making workshop. Lucy watched, fascinated, as he sat on the ground with the little ones, patiently teaching them how to tie knots and balance the sticks, as if he had been doing it his whole life. At the end of the day, when the event concluded with musical performances and a prize raffle, Edward's presence no longer felt strange. He had integrated perfectly, winning over the organizers and volunteers with his genuine willingness to help. Thank you for today, Lucy said when they were finally alone, helping to dismantle the last stalls under a sky beginning to turn orange. It was surprising. Good or bad? Definitely good, she smiled. I never imagined Edward Sterling setting up sound equipment and teaching kids how to make kites. He laughed, moving closer. There are a lot of things about me you still don't know. Like what? Like the fact that when I was a kid, my biggest dream was to be an astronaut, or that I collect miniature classic cars, or that every Friday night I like to cook while listening to jazz. Lucy felt her heart race with his proximity, with the intimacy of those unpretentious confessions. I want to know those things, she finally admitted. All of them. Edward touched her face gently. Does that mean you're giving me a second chance? It means I'm willing to try, she replied sincerely. Day by day. No grand promises, just trying. The kiss that followed was different from the previous ones. There were no more secrets or half-truths between them, just two people choosing to be together, despite all the odds against them. The next morning, the Manhattan Society newspaper, run by Eliza Montgomery, featured a front-page photo of Edward helping set up stalls at the event in Queens. The sensationalist headline screamed, "Sterling heir abandons luxury for forbidden love." The article, filled with malicious insinuations and half-truths, suggested that Edward was having a nervous breakdown or going through a premature midlife crisis. It mentioned Lucy as the waitress who bewitched the billionaire and questioned her true intentions. When Edward saw the report, his first concern was Lucy. He called her immediately. "Have you seen the paper?" he asked as soon as she answered. "My mother showed me." Lucy's voice sounded tired. "I think our trying just got a lot more complicated." "Does this change anything for you?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I don't like the idea of being a public spectacle. To have having my life scrutinized, my motives questioned." "I can sue the paper," Edward offered. Eliza went too far. "And what good would that do? It would just add more fuel to the circus." Lucy sighed. "I always knew this could happen." It's part of the package when you get involved with someone famous. I'm sorry, Edward murmured, feeling guilty for dragging Lucy into this unwanted exposure. It's not your fault, she replied, surprising him. It was my choice too, remember, we're trying together. The certainty in Lucy's voice was like a balm. For the first time since he had met her, Edward felt that she truly believed in them as a couple, with all the complications and challenges that entailed. The following weeks brought a routine of mutual adjustments. Edward learned to navigate public transportation, discovered the pleasure of dining in small family restaurants in faraway neighborhoods, and experienced the simplicity of walking through public parks without being recognized, or if he was, he no longer cared. Lucy, in turn, gradually got used to the occasional attention they received when they went out together in more central parts of the city. She learned to ignore curious stares and malicious comments, focusing only on what really mattered, the genuine connection between them. One afternoon, as they were walking hand in hand down Fifth Avenue after watching a free street concert, they were approached by Beatrice Alistair Price, who was leaving a luxury store with her friends. "Edward, what a surprise!" she exclaimed with false cheer. Her gaze shifted to Lucy and then to their intertwined hands. "And this must be the famous— What's your name again, dear?" "Lucy Fields," she replied calmly, holding the hostile gaze. "Of course, how could I forget? The waitress who made headlines." Beatrice smiled venomously. "Edward always had a weakness for the exotic, but I must confess you're lasting longer than the previous ones." Edward felt Lucy tense beside him. He was about to respond when, to his surprise, Lucy took the lead. "You know what's really interesting, Miss Alistair Price? How some people confuse titles with character and wealth with worth." Her voice was calm but firm. "Edward chose to be with me not because I'm exotic or different, but because with him I'm authentic. Something I imagine is rare in your social circle." Beatrice turned pale, clearly unaccustomed to being confronted. "How dare you?" "Daring is exactly what we're doing," Edward interrupted, squeezing Lucy's hand. "We're daring to be happy outside the script that people like you consider appropriate. And you know what? It's working out wonderfully." They walked away, leaving Beatrice furious, surrounded by her equally shocked friends. When they turned the corner, Edward couldn't hold back his laughter. "You were incredible," he declared, pulling Lucy into a hug. "Absolutely incredible." "I thought I was going to be shaking," she confessed, laughing too. "But when she started with that exotic and previous ones talk, something just exploded inside me. Beatrice has never been confronted like that in her life." Edward shook his head in admiration. "And you did it without losing your class. I learned from my mother. She always says that true class isn't in the clothes or jewelry, but in how you treat others. That small victory over prejudice and social expectations further strengthened the bond between them. It was as if every obstacle overcome together reaffirmed the choice they had made for each other." Meanwhile, Amelia Sterling watched from a distance, through reports and photos delivered by private investigators, her son's transformation. To her surprise and displeasure, Edward seemed happier and more fulfilled than she had ever seen him. His performance at the company remained impeccable. In fact, it had improved, as if personal happiness fueled his business creativity. Realizing she couldn't separate them by force or social pressure, Amelia decided to change tactics. If you can't beat them, perhaps it was time to join them. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she rarely used. "Helen Fields? This is Amelia Sterling. I think we need to talk about our children." That night, as Edward and Lucy shared a homemade pizza in his apartment, completely oblivious to the new conspiracies forming, they made plans for the future. Not grand or definitive, but small promises of shared moments, joint discoveries, a life built step by step, day by day, outside of any pre-established script. "You know what I like most about you?" Lucy asked, nestled in Edward's arms as they watched the illuminated city from the window. "My newfound kite-making skills," he joked. "Your courage," she answered seriously. "To challenge everything you knew, to start over, to choose something uncertain but true." Edward kissed her hair, feeling a fullness that no business achievement had ever provided. "It wasn't courage," he whispered. "It was love." The acclaimed restaurant Daniel in the heart of Manhattan was the kind of establishment where multi-million-dollar deals were closed over glasses of award-winning wine and dishes signed by renowned chefs. On that rainy Thursday afternoon, A discreet table in the back hosted a meeting as unlikely as it was significant. Amelia Sterling, impeccable in her Chanel suit, observed the woman across from her with curiosity. Helen Fields, wearing a simple but elegant dress, maintained a dignified posture, despite the cane resting discreetly against her chair. There was an aura of intelligence and insight in her gaze that, Amelia had to admit, was impressive. "Thank you for accepting my invitation, Helen," Amelia began after the waiter had served tea for them both. "I imagine it was surprising." "I confess I was intrigued," Helen replied calmly. "The mother of my daughter's billionaire boyfriend wanting a private meeting. Impossible to refuse." The slightly ironic tone did not go unnoticed by Amelia, who smiled politely. "Let's get straight to the point then. Our children seem determined to carry on with this relationship against all odds." "Against all your expectations, you mean," Helen corrected, adding sugar to her tea. "Because frankly, I don't see why my daughter wouldn't be good enough for your son." Amelia suppressed the urge to roll her eyes. "It's not about being good enough, it's about compatibility. Different worlds, different expectations, social obligations." "Social obligations," Helen repeated, as if savoring the words. "Fascinating how your social class has transformed medieval marital arrangements into social obligations. Much more elegant." The comment struck Amelia like a small, precise arrow. It was clear that the former university professor would not be easily manipulated. "You are very perceptive, Dr. Fields. Now I understand where Lucy gets her personality from." "And Edward clearly inherited your determination," Helen retorted with a small smile, "because he seems absolutely set on being with my daughter, no matter how many obstacles you put in his way." Amelia took a sip of tea, studying the woman before her. She had anticipated hostility or perhaps greed, an opportunity to negotiate some kind of financial settlement to get her daughter to back off. Instead, she found a worthy adversary who challenged her intellectually. "May I be frank with you, Helen?" she finally asked. "Please." "I've tried everything to separate Edward and Lucy. Social pressure, manipulation, even public humiliation. Nothing has worked. On the contrary, every obstacle seems to strengthen the bond between them." Amelia sighed. "And what's most surprising, Edward is flourishing. I've never seen him so committed to the company, so creative, so alive." Helen nodded as if she had been expecting this confession. "And that surprises you because it goes against everything I've always believed, that suitable marriages, strategic social connections, were the foundation of a successful life." "How was your marriage, Amelia?" Helen asked softly, without hostility. The question caught Amelia off guard. No one dared to question her about such personal aspects of her life. "It was appropriate," she finally answered. "My husband and I had common goals, compatible families. We built an empire together." "Were you happy?" Helen insisted. Amelia hesitated, and that brief moment of hesitation was more revealing than any words. "Happiness is an overrated concept," she declared at last. "Stability, legacy, purpose, those are more lasting values." Helen leaned slightly over the table. "Do you know why I support my daughter's relationship with your son, even knowing all the complications that will come? Because when I see them together, I see something I never had with Lucy's father, something you apparently didn't experience either: genuine joy in each other's presence." The words hit Amelia like precise little needles, finding vulnerable spots she didn't even know she had. "And what if it doesn't last?" she questioned, giving voice to her real fear. "What if it's just a phase, a rebellion, and Edward ends up hurting your daughter? Or worse, what if he wakes up 5 years from now and realizes he threw away everything we've built for an idealized romance?" The vulnerability in Amelia's voice surprised them both. Helen studied the other woman's face for a moment before answering. "That's the risk of any relationship, Amelia. Even those carefully arranged." She paused. "But they are adults. They have the right to choose their own risks, to make their own mistakes, and also to find their own happiness, even if it's not the way we planned it for them." Amelia absorbed those words in silence. There was something in Helen's serenity, in the wisdom that emanated from her, that was impossible to ignore. "What do you suggest then?" she finally asked. "That we stop fighting them and start supporting them," Helen answered simply. "Not because we approve unconditionally, but because we love our children and want to see them happy." "That means what exactly?" "For a start, perhaps a dinner, the 4 of us together." Helen smiled at Amelia's expression. Yes, I know. Unlikely, but no more unlikely than this tea we're sharing now. Meanwhile, in Edward's office, an equally significant meeting was underway. Richard Alastair Price had requested a private meeting without specifying the reason. Sitting comfortably in the armchair across from Edward's desk, the banker seemed strangely relaxed, for someone whose family arrangement had been publicly rejected. Thank you for seeing me, Edward, especially after everything. Your request intrigued me, Edward admitted. I thought our last encounter at the board meeting had closed the personal matter between our families. Richard nodded. Indeed. But I'm here on a different matter. A new project that I believe might interest Sterling Properties. Edward leaned forward, interested. What kind of project? Urban revitalization in Queens. The mention of the area where Lucy had grown up immediately captured Edward's attention. My analysts have identified untapped potential in areas like Queensbridge and Jamaica, Richard continued, not for luxury condos or shopping malls, but for mixed-use developments that truly benefit the local community. Cultural centers, co-working spaces, affordable housing units with sustainable technology. That doesn't sound like your usual portfolio, Edward observed, curious. Richard smiled. Let's just say my daughter wasn't the only one to undergo a transformation recently. Your courage in defying conventions made me question some of my own paradigms. Edward studied the older man with new interest. Richard Alastair Price was known for his conservatism, both in business and in his personal life. To see him proposing a project with a social bent was, to say the least, surprising. I'm intrigued, Edward admitted. Why come directly to me and not to the board? Because you know the area through the eyes of someone who loves it, Richard answered simply. And because I believe a project like this needs passion, not just financial calculations. The conversation stretched for hours, with Richard presenting preliminary studies and Edward contributing insights based on what he had learned from Lucy about the community's real needs. By the end of the meeting, they had sketched out the general lines of an innovative partnership that could transform not only the urban landscape, but the lives of thousands of families. I'll need the board's approval to move forward, Edward commented, examining the notes they had made. Including your mother's, Richard observed. Especially my mother's, Edward agreed with a sigh. And we're not exactly on the best of terms lately. Richard stood up to leave. Perhaps it's time to build a bridge, Edward, not just in Queens, but within your own family as well. That night, when Edward arrived at Lucy's apartment for their weekly dinner with her and Helen, he was greeted with surprising news. My mother had lunch with yours today, Lucy announced as soon as he walked in, her eyes wide with disbelief. Edward froze with his coat in his hand. She what? Your mother invited mine for tea at Daniel. They talked for almost 2 hours, and no one left injured, Edward joked, trying to process the information. Helen emerged from the small kitchen, smiling at Edward's perplexed expression. Your mother is a fascinating woman, Edward. Stubborn, proud, and overly concerned with appearances, but fascinating. That sounds exactly like her, he agreed, still stunned. What did you talk about? About you two, of course, Helen replied, sitting down with some difficulty. Her MS had worsened in recent weeks, making her movements more limited, and about our very different perspectives on what constitutes a suitable relationship. And did you come to any conclusion? Lucy asked, serving the dinner she had prepared. Helen smiled enigmatically. Let's just say we found some common ground. Amelia invited all of us actually, for dinner at her house next Sunday. Edward nearly choked on the water he was drinking. She did what? That's right. A formal dinner at the Sterling mansion, the three of us and her. Lucy and Edward exchanged looks of pure astonishment. Whatever the conversation between the two women had been, it had prompted the unthinkable. It's a trap, Lucy declared, suspicious. She's going to humiliate us somehow. I don't think that's the case, Helen answered thoughtfully. Amelia Sterling is many things, but she's not dishonest. I think she genuinely wants to try. Edward watched the two most important women in his life discussing his mother, the third most important woman, however complicated that relationship was, and felt an unexpected wave of hope. If his mother was willing to take a step toward reconciliation, maybe there was a chance for them as a family. Later, while helping Lucy with the dishes, a household chore he had recently learned and surprisingly enjoyed, Edward shared Richard's proposal for the project in Queens. "That's incredible, Edward," Lucy exclaimed, her eyes shining. "A decent cultural centre in Queens would make a huge difference. And affordable housing with sustainable technology? That's exactly what the area needs. The problem is convincing the board, especially my mother." Lucy looked at him thoughtfully, drying her hands. "What if you present the project at the dinner on Sunday?" "To my mother? Before taking it to the board?" "Exactly. Show her that it's not just a business project, but something that could really make a difference, something that unites our worlds in a positive way." The idea was audacious, but it made sense. Amelia had always valued initiative and strategic vision. Presenting the project as a bridge between their realities could be exactly the symbolic gesture needed to start a new phase. Sunday arrived faster than any of them were prepared for. Edward picked up Lucy and Helen in his personal car. The Porsche had been replaced by a more discreet model in recent months, and together they drove to the Sterling mansion on the Upper East Side. "I'm nervous," Lucy admitted, adjusting the navy blue dress she had carefully chosen for the 10th time. Elegant without being ostentatious, it was the most formal thing she owned. "Me too," Edward confessed, surprising her. "I haven't had a formal dinner with my mother in months." "You two are being ridiculous," Helen interjected from the back seat. "It's just a dinner, not an audience with the Queen." They all laughed, the tension momentarily broken. Edward reached for Lucy's hand, squeezing it gently. "Together?" he asked. "Together," she confirmed. The Sterling mansion, with its imposing facade and meticulously cared-for gardens, seemed intimidating under the golden light of the late afternoon. Regina, the housekeeper, greeted them at the door with a welcoming formality that surprised Lucy and Helen. Amelia was waiting in the main living room, elegant as always in a pearl-grey silk dress. To Edward's surprise, she not only greeted Helen with apparent cordiality, but also approached Lucy and, after a moment's hesitation, gave her a brief hug. "Welcome to our home," she said, with a formality that couldn't completely hide her nervousness. "I'm glad you accepted the invitation." The dinner that followed was a surreal experience for everyone. The conversation, initially cautious and filled with rehearsed pleasantries, gradually relaxed when Helen began to talk about American literature, a subject that, surprisingly, Amelia also held a great interest in. Between the main course and dessert, Edward gathered the courage to present his idea. "Mother, I'd like to share a project I'm developing with Richard Alastair Price," he began, opening the tablet he had discreetly brought. "Richard?" Amelia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I thought, after the incident with Beatrice, you two were distant." "On the contrary, Richard has been surprisingly understanding." Edward activated the presentation. "And visionary." For the next 20 minutes, he presented the Queen's revitalization project in detail, highlighting both the social benefits and the potential long-term financial return. Lucy occasionally interjected with insights about the local community, while Helen offered perspectives on how the cultural centre could integrate with the region's educational system. When he finished, Amelia remained silent for a long moment, studying the sketches and projections on the screen. "This is ambitious," she commented finally, "and completely different from our usual portfolio." "That's precisely why it has the potential to redefine our brand," Edward argued, "not just as developers of luxury properties, but as agents of urban transformation." "The board will resist," Amelia observed. "Probably," Edward agreed, "unless the chairwoman of the board supports the initiative." Amelia met her son's gaze, and something silent passed between them. A challenge, a recognition, perhaps even the beginning of a reconciliation. "I'll need to study the numbers more carefully," she said finally. "But conceptually, it's interesting." Coming from Amelia Sterling, that was equivalent to an enthusiastic endorsement. Later, as they were served coffee on the veranda overlooking the illuminated garden, Amelia surprised them all again. "Edward told me you volunteer at the Queensbridge Community Centre," she commented, addressing Lucy. "I imagine you have your own ideas about how a cultural centre should function." "I have a few, yes," Lucy answered cautiously. "I'd like to hear them. If we're going to invest in something like this, we need perspectives from someone who truly understands the community's needs." Edward watched, amazed, as his mother and Lucy engaged in a genuine conversation about cultural programs, accessibility, and community involvement. It wasn't unconditional acceptance. Amelia still asked challenging questions and occasionally let her elitism show, But it was a start. When the evening came to an end and they were preparing to leave, Amelia took Edward aside for a moment. "She is extraordinary," she admitted in a low voice. "Not what I expected for you, but I can begin to understand the attraction." "It's more than attraction, Mother," Edward corrected gently. "It's love and gratitude for showing me a life beyond expectations and obligations." Amelia nodded slowly. "Your father would have liked her, you know. He always said I was the only one who truly challenged him intellectually." A melancholic smile crossed her face. "I think you found yours." In the car, on the way to Queen's, a comfortable silence enveloped the three of them. It had been a night of small miracles, not a complete acceptance or an instant reconciliation, but the beginning of something new, a possibility. "Your mother offered me a job," Lucy finally revealed, breaking the silence. Edward almost lost control of the car. "What?" "As a cultural consultant for the Queen's project." Lucy still seemed stunned. "She said she needs someone who really knows the community and has good enough taste not to turn everything into a colorful circus." Her words. From the back seat, Helen laughed. "Amelia Sterling is a rare one. She can manage a compliment and an insult in the same sentence." "Did you accept?" Edward asked, curious. "I said I needed to think about it," Lucy replied. "I don't want it to look like I'm using our relationship to get professional opportunities." Edward took her hand. "You're the perfect person for the job, and my mother would never offer a position to someone she didn't consider competent, relationship or not." As the car crossed the city, from the luxurious mansions of the Upper East Side to the simple apartment buildings of Queens, Edward thought about how that journey reflected his own personal transformation, borders being crossed, prejudices challenged, new paths discovered. As they said their goodbyes in front of the small building where Lucy and Helen lived, Edward hugged his beloved's mother with genuine affection. "Thank you for today," he said. "For everything." Helen smiled. "Just promise me you'll continue to be the man my daughter chose to love, not the man the world expected you to be." "I promise," he replied with absolute sincerity. When they were alone, Edward pulled Lucy close, feeling his heart race as it always did when he held her in his arms. "You know what I realized today?" he murmured against her hair. "What?" "That we built a bridge between our worlds, our families, our futures, and it's stronger than anyone could have imagined." Lucy lifted her face to look at him, her eyes shining with contained emotion. "We still have a long way to go, and we'll walk it together, one step at a time." The kiss that sealed that promise was like a new beginning, not the happy ending of a fairy tale, but the true start of a shared journey, with all the challenges and joys that real life provides when we choose to follow our hearts. No matter how unlikely the path may seem,